Good afternoon, everyone. I'm so happy to be here. It's a really exciting time for France. As you know, we just had the President Emmanuel Macron on the cover of Variety, and France has really reclaimed its place at the center, as the center of global culture. We have this year one of the most exciting movie. I think you all agree, Emilia Perez, which was the opening night film here. And surprisingly, this movie is set in Mexico, but it's shot entirely in France. And there is another great example that we're going to discuss here is The Substance, which was shot in Paris as well and takes place in LA. So I think we have a lot to talk about. But I think one of the greatest examples of what France can offer is the Count of Monte-Cristo, which we're really happy to have the producer, Dimitri Rassam, here. And this movie, I don't know if you've seen it, but when you watch it, it looks like a mega production, a blockbuster that could cost, above $100 million, but it actually shot for much less. And we're going to actually kick off the discussion with Dimitri, who's going to tell us how he made it happen and how it looks so beautiful.
Merci, Elsa. Thanks. We made that movie indeed for a fraction of, I think, what it would have cost elsewhere. But I look at what we achieved as the product of the last 4 or 5 years of trying to set up ambitious French productions in France, in Europe, while emulating how American cinema approaches storytelling. So we're trying to build bridges more than trying to oppose one system to another. But we have to do it while being, aware of the size of our market and also our very specific way of approaching things. And France, as you mentioned, the Count of Monte-Cristo was shot mostly in France. Out of 77 days, we shot 70 days on location. We shot also 70 days entirely in France. We went to Malta and we went to Belgium for a couple of days, which is also an illustration of what I think, when you look at France, you should look at it as a center of gravity of European cinema. But whatever you don't have in France, and there's not that much you can find close by in Europe. And you have a tapestry, if you want, of industries, of talent that truly, I think, allow you to whatever production would come over to be fully serviced by French talent, servicing companies, and obviously TAFFF has a whole variety of facilities in France that, not just in France, by the way, that's also the thing about French groups that have, the ambition to be able to cater to productions of various kinds. And I think also this year is a strong illustration of the strengths of French cinema by the diversity of its offer. Emilia Perez, The Substance, The Count of Monte-Cristo, L'Amour Ouf, which is also doing massive numbers in France, are all very different in tone, all very different in approach, but they share a similar level of ambition for what justifies theatrical. And if you look at what happened post-COVID, there was kind of a Darwinian moment in French cinema, which is, why do you justify making a movie for theatrical? And I guess our industry has been in crisis over the past century, so we're used to adapting and reinventing ourselves. But it truly is, I think, the manifestation of more risk in terms of storytelling, more risk in terms of budget, and to some degree, France as a whole, industry-wise, has also stepped up. There's been this plan, which is, maybe you can speak to that, which is the investment in studios, but across the board, France has decided to step up.
Yeah, no, definitely. I think since the pandemic, we've seen that a lot of, the independent film sector has struggled, including in the US, unfortunately. But actually in France, because we have a system of subsidies and the government is really dedicated to having a very strong culture, we have had a lot of initiatives taken to protect, the independent film sector, and that goes to, the film studios. So, for instance, the government has put in place an investment plan that's called France 2030, and I think they want to invest like 200 million euros in studios, like in improving the studio offer. So that's a very big push. So maybe, Laurent, you can talk about that.
Absolutely. But the first thing I want to talk about before we speak about the expansion of the infrastructure in France is about the workforce. And that's actually the first question that American studios who want to come to France ask us about. It's people. And the infrastructure is, and the tax credit and everything is important, of course. But we have people who are now able to work with American crews, and they are so happy to do that, and the way they work in France, the work division is a little different, so it helps also in terms of budget. When coming to France, sometimes American productions think, fringes and blah, 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 but then they talk to PSCs, and PSCs really reassure them about the fact that it's not going to be a problem. And that's 100% of cases, and there's only success stories with American people coming to shoot in France. So, having said that, France 2030, I'll be quick on that.
We're going to talk about, just quickly, we're going to talk about at some point later on, because I wanted to talk about the kind of myth about the French people taking 3-hour breaks and, all of that. It's kind of something of the past, France has been totally Americanized, so people are actually working really hard. But
right. Yeah, back on infrastructure, France 2030 has helped us to bump up the number of sound stages. Something like 50 sound stages are being built at the moment while we speak in France, including our facility. We're opening 12 new sound stages in 25 with a big backlot. And the backlot thing is also something important because shooting inside a studio is one thing, but also the exterior set is also something where you have control. Paris welcomes like 7,000 days of shooting a year, and that's just like LA. Actually, it's not far, and it has become increasingly difficult for production to shoot inside major capitals. So backlots have become more and more important in terms of controlling your environment while still having a lot of freedom to shoot.
Yeah, that's what we've lacked of, right? The backlot, we didn't have that much offer for backlot, and I think what's been launched in Paris is like a mini Paris. So like when you walk around, it looks like completely identical to the streets of Paris. Can you?
If you want to shoot the Eiffel Tower or the Arc de Triomphe, then you would go to Paris, but you would minimize the number of days you shoot inside the city because it's more, it's going to be more cost effective than to shoot on the backlot. But then I want to mention, I'm not here only on behalf of TSF. I mean, I'm here on behalf of the integrity of the infrastructure in France, and I see my friend Olivier here from Marseille. Provence Studio have done a tremendous job at welcoming American productions as well, The Nun, and so on and so forth. There's an ecosystem here that has built up with the years, and I think I think I'm trying to convince you to come. And that's what I'm trying to do. Yeah.
Okay, that's awesome. Jon, I would love to hear about your experience shooting outside of the United States, and maybe tell me about in Europe specifically, and how France is different from everything.
Well, I've shot pretty much everywhere, all over Europe, including UK, and down in Australia, and even a little bit in China. Not entirely with the government's approval on that one. Oh, some of the people know that film. Good. But Le Coin Rouge en français. But the thing is, I spend my life basically selling dreams, and I go to buyers and say, give me money. In this situation, as to where I would shoot, I need to be sold. So I would like to shoot in France, and my DP is Denis Lenoir. That's not a name from Brooklyn, right? He's pretty good, works with Olivier. And one of my favorite key grips is Eric Aupetit. So, I'm very comfortable, with the French crews, and I actually would have a blast. But what I need to know is what's the actual cost, because what you're talking about on the Count of Monte-Cristo is perfect. You're shooting where and then coming back. So you're using France as a true studio, and you're going out. And you made those decisions based on whatever parameters, correct?
Well, I mean, whether it's Monte-Cristo or the Three Musketeers, which was shot with the same technical crew,
Right.
we had a decision. We made a decision which was both political, which was honestly we couldn't conceive making those movies and celebrating French culture and shooting them outside of France. But we also had the conviction that when you look at a budget, you look at the integrity of your relationship to your actors, everything, just the interaction with the sets. Our belief was that we would get a better movie by being as immersed as possible in the actual environment we wanted to display. So I'm sure there would have been a version of our budget that would have been potentially more cost-effective elsewhere. I'm not sure we would have gotten the same movies.
But would you have been able to like rebuild the
you can always look. I mean, there is. I believe for instance, we ended up shooting Marseille, the harbor of Marseille, in Malta because it just really doesn't exist anymore in France. So, and we wanted to have as much as possible actual physical locations. For that movie, I've done movies that were heavily studio, but for that movie, we felt it was imperative to be as truthful in terms of the environments, the set, et cetera, et cetera. We were driven by what serves the story most, and obviously that story is set mostly in France. And not surprisingly, we found in France something that. But I will say, look, Cyrano de Bergerac, which was an inspiration, was shot in Eastern Europe.
Right.
So it's always going to be a cost versus result.
And you're going to have the filmmakers going to weigh in of the actors
exactly
making the movie and realizing that vision. So all I'm trying to say is a very simple thing, which is there are two sort of separate elements. One is you've got the production, and then that's going to be a very bare bones thing, usually about money and about resources and crew. Let me just finish for a second, please. And the second thing is what's going to get the best movie made. So for instance, I shot a movie called Uprising in Bratislava, Poland, and Vienna. Raffaele De Laurentiis, as a brilliant producer, was the producer. We went to Bratislava because it was just cheaper to build the sets because Warsaw didn't exist at that time, and virtual sets weren't where they are today, where they're going to be 5 days from now. So, and I wanted for myself and for the actors to have them walk on a set and see Warsaw circa 1939, 1941, 1943. So that was very important to me. So my point is just a simple one. Like when I did Three Musketeers for Disney, we shot in Prague. We shot in Czechoslovakia. But it was like, okay,
Do you regret it in hindsight?
First of all, I was one of the producers. I wasn't as actively involved as when I direct or when I work with certain directors. So the answer to the question is, I really didn't make the decision. But the point is, back then, that was the choice on that American production. What you're talking about is something different, and it's something I'm very excited about and happy that it's happening because it's more Eurocentric, and I think it's more truthful.
But there's one project which is an American project that we're going to be doing normally next year, which I can't divulge what we're doing now. But I think a happy marriage is of content-wise needs to be organic. So, I think France is ready to harbor pretty much everything. We have the facility, whether it's VFX, the sets, the crews, but that's what I wanted to hint at.
Be careful of when you use the word content with filmmakers or certain film producers, because we don't like that word.
Well, but that's my whole point, which is if you want to make it right in terms of why to choose France, I will say it's the overall level of quality of talent that you have. And for my movies, obviously, we made that decision, again, not because it was more cost effective, but because it was what was warranted to make those movies right. And making those Three Musketeers movies, which were the inception of making those large frescoes again, we wanted to channel what had been done by Claude Berry a couple of decades ago. And we just felt like for a shoot that was 150 days, if we wanted the actors to be in it, we couldn't shoot in studio. We needed them to be immersed, and we needed them to be as much as possible, as close as possible to the story. But I will say, one of the interesting things about what's happening right now is, again, in the Jacques Audiard movie, the reason to shoot it in France is because he's got his crews, he's got his way of doing things. It's an entirely studio movie. So our approach for that movie was dictated by what we felt was right, but a different director took a wholly different approach, and it worked. And what I'm saying is French crews now, because of the emulation between those different movies, the renewed level of ambition of the filmmakers, but also the whole, I guess, industry. Because that Darwinian moment of COVID of, okay, are we giving up? Are we, as you said, just a content provider, or do we have an ambition culturally, but also do we want to be relevant? It is translating today. So the reason I wanted to participate in the panel is the preconception that the French are not working as fast or more expensive. I mean, all of that I think is untrue. And I look at it because I'm trying to make movies that build bridges between our two systems. I think France is right now highly competitive. I don't know if it will be always, but I'm saying right now it is.
Thank you. Jay, can you talk about your experience, because you also look at incentives everywhere. I know that France has a tax rebate, but it's actually not the best. But what's your take on that? How we can do that?
Well, let me say that basically what happens these days, and everybody, for the most part realizes this, we get a project and we think globally. We think where on the entire planet is the best place to make this project, whether it's a film or a series. And there are more options available than ever before. There's 120 incentives sitting out there, and I was saying this to Jon earlier, with $10 to $15 billion sitting out there every year, right? So, and as a result of those incentives, there's infrastructure that have built up like never before. So in one way, we have incredible creative options more than ever before. But I love your comment, and I think this goes into the HBO aspect of things, that it isn't always where it's the cheapest to make something, it's where it's most cost effective. And both in terms of what Jon said and Ken Monte-Cristo, you want to go where the film is going to be, you're going to tell the story in a way that ideally where it takes place, because then those are the people, that's the environment. You pick up things which you can't even put in a context of financing when you're trying to get to the soul of telling of a story. But in this day and age where there's a lot of pressure on budgets, what happens is, well, we'd love to shoot in France or somewhere else, but of course we're going to do 2, 3, 4 other budgets, because there's probably other places where it could be even cheaper, maybe not as cost effective. So that's what we look for. And I think we have 3 recent experiences in France, and I think this, and I'm going to say this as a group and entity that have just shot there in the last 4 years in COVID. And what we walked away with, because we'd heard the story about the fringes and so, I mean, that stuff has been around, right, for the last decade or two. We went over, and yes, the fringes, but there's fringes in every country, so let's not get hung up on the fringes. A couple of the main takeaways. So we shot Irma Vep, okay, French story, is a French director, right? And A24, and it's like, well, the French director wants to shoot in France. Of course, you're going to shoot that story in France, but okay, we're going to go there. We shot, and that was over 100 days. We shot 21 days of Julia, story of Julia Child, which just as an antidote, even though we didn't pick it up for season 3, the producers came back so impressed after 21 days in France. They said, if we do this, we're coming back to France. We're going to shoot most of the next season in France. That's how impactful it was to them. And then we recently shot The Noon, was an HBO, but part of Warner Brothers Discovery. And what complete takeaways. The crew size, probably a half to a third of what we would be doing on a film here. Irma Vep, 50 to 75 people. On a project here, we're 150 at a minimum to a 500-person crew. We can do that. We did the same thing for 50 to 75 people.
How come? Tell us. Is it
because that's
the
all
French
we
are
needed.
so much efficient?
We didn't need the bigger machine. And also, that's how you do it in France. And when you go and you work with people that the way they do it, we don't have to impose these other ideas. There's an incredible history of filmmaking in France. And we've worked with people in visual effects and post there. Some of the most incredible artists, and I say this with all respect, that we've worked with. So take advantage of that when you go to a place like that, and people contribute that. So it was the size of the crews, the cost. Obviously, shooting in downtown Paris is going to be expensive, but the site rentals didn't have. Everybody goes, oh, it's so expensive in France. Well, in the middle of the tourist season, of course things are going to be expensive. Well, you don't go and book hotels in that part of the city, right? So almost common sense from that standpoint. But I think our takeaway was, wait a minute, We've been sitting with some of these things, unfortunately, 'cause they get burned and people talk around town, well, what was your last experience there? And I think we completely walked away and saying, wait a minute, France, there's a way to do it there. If it belongs there, they embrace it, let's work with them. And we came up like completely like blinders off. And I think that's why France now, we look at it as competitive as so many other places around the world right now, so.
Amazing. I love to hear that. Thank you so much. In terms of the tax rebate, I wonder if you can address.
Well, without getting into too technical about the rebate itself, it's a good rebate. The reality is, in this day and age, because there's so many rebates out there, what's important is that you have a rebate that works for your country, that works for you politically, that brings some addition to it. You can. We all have the charts. You go around the world, you can see where the top 10 incentives are, the top 20 incentives are. But again, it's not always the bottom line. So what you need is a competitive incentive. Doesn't have to be the best. France now has listened. It's a very competitive incentive.
How much is it, like 40%, I think?
What's that?
How much is it, 40%?
You want to explain it?
Yeah, it's 30%.
30%.
But if you do more than $2 million of VFX, it goes up to, you've got a 10% bump going up to 40%, which extends to the integrity of the budget. So
right. It's competitive. It's competitive. Yes.
But it's still not as good as the UK one, right?
Yeah, but that's a different. You know, I mean, we know where the top incentives are in the world. It's mathematics, okay? But not everything belongs in the UK. And the reality is, you want, again, from a creative standpoint, I don't want to go to one place and do everything. Yes, we're filmmakers and we can cheat things, but I want to go to where the story takes place, ideally, because that's when you're going to get the soul of the story to come through. And it's not just the actors, it's the crew. They go and they get set dressing and props and things from a store where either that's where they originally made it, or you go find somebody that made the original prop and they make it for you in the film. That's when it works, right? When it really comes across.
But it seems also that back in the day it was only like big US productions that were shooting in studios, but now you have a whole range of movies, independent movies, filming in studios. Maybe you can talk about that, Jon.
Well, it's shifting a little bit. The independent film is not a real business model. It's where a lot of the greatest work comes, because it's unconstrained by the executives who make their living getting audiences to come to see a movie. There's a little bit more what I would call idealism and artistic freedom. And, you know, for people like myself, when I go to make a movie, what I'm looking for is excitement. What I want is not just the best financial situation, it's the overall situation and experience. So if the crew cares about the film and they really want to make it, that creates an environment where everybody feels it, enjoys it, and I believe it comes up on screen. And when I've said I've shot everywhere, a lot of the places I've shot have not been crews that do that. So when you get that excitement, and sometimes it's not even just the crews, it's the world around the crews. And I'm not talking about on a studio lot. And I think what you said about the studio lot is really crucial because it changes. So independents are slightly a different ballgame. The stages will play mostly to studios and then a portion of the independents, in my opinion. So I think the key thing that probably would be useful for people to be aware of about what shooting in France is like is exactly what you said. You know it, all right? It's when someone who's responsible in a studio position says, we had a great experience. We had half the size of the crew, and we moved faster. On a number of the films I've done that are lower budget, I have a smaller crew. Do I like that? Oh, I love it. Everybody loves it, you know, because you can move quicker and because you can get to have that family develop that's there to do what? To make the film, to make you look at it, watch it, and say, yeah, this is what I love about film. So that's ultimately the goal. And then there are two other things I think that are worth talking about here. One is that the world's moving, all right? You're sitting in the DGA, right? We have a committee that Chris Nolan and I had called the AI Committee. Anybody heard of AI here? Everybody's heard of it. So what's it going to be? What's that going to mean? Well, AI has been around for a long time, and stages, particularly virtual stages, afford you an enormous value in certain circumstances. Probably over time, it's going to increase the amount of usage. I did a film that I didn't direct, but I produced called Sky Captain and World of Tomorrow. It was shot up in England with a young, brilliant filmmaker, Kerry Conrad, and we took over a stage and we put it on the computer. This is 2004, I think it was, and we shot everything virtually. And it was really brilliant what he did. Film didn't do a lot of business. And then 300 came out a year or two later. They took the same technology that we had, and they had a very successful film. So I think the balance of what I'm taking here is the excitement that you're experiencing in recent productions in France. And that is something that I think should be thought of as probably the most important thing to be communicated to filmmakers and studio executives. Because when you add it all up, you know, the dollars may be the same or very close. It's going to be what's the final product? What's going to make it the best film possible? That goes to what you were saying.
And it's also, to get to your point, it definitely depends on what you're looking for. Because a lot of what, I mean, I will talk personally. We finance what we produce ourselves. So the decision process is vastly different. We're all independents in France. Even the big companies, whether it's my usual partner, Pathé, or even the local stations, they're considered independents because that's how they define themselves vis-a-vis the rest. So we will look at content more often than none and try to partner up on it, not just be a servicing company. But I will say the ideal ecosystem is we know each other really well. So if you want to access our way of doing things, the ideal scenario is find the right partner, the right producing partner that will bring in, as you said, the crews that care for it. I mean, for us, in a way, we're digging in different holes. I mean, you guys know how to make movies under 5 million way better than we do. We've lost that tradition in a way. You know how to make movies over 100 million way better than we do. We don't do these movies often. But the whole range in between, I think we've developed I mean, let's just say there's a tradition of making those movies that is now pretty well, you know, ingrained. And it is a prototype. It's a movie-by-movie approach. But I will say that our crews in France are so happy to be involved in ambitious projects, whether it's a French or an American movie, that yes, you will get more out of their degree of involvement. I not to, you know, again, preach for our, if you find a movie that warrants being told in France and in Europe, on top of that, you will have access to everything you need to tell the story properly. And I will say, you know, when one of the things we didn't find in France, we found it in Belgium. You will always find something very, very close by that allows you to make your movie, you know, in general, in the vicinity of France.
And then what's also interesting, what you're doing at TFF is like building state-of-the-art studios, and what you were saying about how has technology been incorporated into the studio offer in France?
Well, there's two things. I mean, virtual production is something that has started pretty big, and there's this 3D thing versus the 2D thing, which is supposed to be more invisible. And we're coming back from that a little. I mean, it's got to be a per job kind of thing. And we were in August at Universal, and they had exactly the same vision as we have in France, meaning that you know, these volumes, these LED volumes should be you know, seen on a, you know, from one film to another. You shouldn't just build a big wall and think it's gonna fit for all movies. That's not true at all. So, so that's one thing. And the other thing is sustainability of studios. That's a big thing, and it's going to become more, you know,
carbon-free,
important. Yeah.
right? Is it carbon-free studios?
Absolutely, yeah. We're really trying to be the one of the first ones in Europe and maybe in the world in terms of the way we build things, with the way we recycle things. It's actually very technical. You know, movie producers like between 10 and 15 tons of waste. You know, and it's a lot. And what you are able to do when you shoot on a studio or on a backlot is that we are going to recycle 98% of that When I say 98, it's not a joke. So every piece of wood, every piece of metal would be recycled. And the way we build stages is we use metal that's already been used. So we recycle metal and everything. It's really a circular economy. And studios are also a hub for productions. Actually, I'm sorry guys, but when you think of the emission of carbon on a studio, well, 92% of that comes from the production that we host. And it's only 8% done by the studio. But, and that's a paradox, but we studios can help you to, with the trucks we provide to you, with the way we recycle everything, we can help you to reduce your level of, non-eco-friendliness.
I mean, I'll talk about it just briefly. We have within our production group at HBO, we have a sustainability department. So they go in, they meet with the producers on every show. We have suggestions of things for them to work with, and then when we come to different regions around the world, we will sit and what's wonderful is when there are systems already for us to embrace and walk into. Obviously, every show is a custom-built business every time we go, and we can handle the infrastructure we have to, but these are the kind of things when people are already there, we just lean into it. It makes it so much easier from that standpoint. So I just wanted to say thank you for that.
One detail, I mean, it's not only about sustainability, it's also about making things also more in a more economically viable way. For instance, when you think of Canadian whales, to just take one very technical thing about being sustainable on a studio, you take air and you put it under the earth, 12 meters deep, and then you put it back into the studio so you can preheat the air in the winter and pre-cool it in the summer. And that will save you a lot of money and a lot of fossil fuel and everything. But it's also cost effective. So you know what I mean. I'm not going to give you more examples of that.
It is really important, and I think that you guys can all say that you're taking that into consideration, right, when you're choosing.
Well, again, you're sitting in the DGA building, so the DGA has a sustainability committee run by a wonderful person named Todd Holland. So I think, the fact that you're doing it, if you're doing it at 98%, that's excellent. I think most right-minded people want to do that. And it is a great thing to know walking in that you have those facilities set up like that. The one thing I would also like to mention, since we are in this building, and it's a union, it's a labor union, and the Writers Guild is a labor union, it's very important when you're thinking about productions in France that to the extent absolutely possible, you're hiring, if they're American or DGA directors, and WGA writers. Now, obviously, it's not going to be all the time that the writer is going to be fluent with the subject matter. I'm not even talking about language. But I think as you work within our system, that's a big deal, and particularly when you look at employment globally. Because one of the things, Eglantine is here, where is she? There you are. So we did a program that Jacques Lang had put together called Emergence. What year was that? 2001, 2002, something like that, 1990, I can't remember when it was. 99. So that was sort of, where we took the Sundance model with some young filmmakers. They were brilliant. I mean, these are all French filmmakers. Well, it might have been one Belgian in there, but they were by and large French. And they're fantastic, and they've done extremely well, I believe. So it was one of those things that created a relationship early on, because those relationships that get created in the formative stage are really valuable, just like this whole program is, because it encourages collaboration. It encourages dialogue. It encourages information. So when you say, I go back to the next board meeting and say, he's got a studio that's 98% efficient. How are we doing? And when we call up the studios and say, are you 98% efficient? They say, no. You say, well, make a phone call. They are. It's doable. So it's, again, that knowledge and that conversation, because what do? We make movies. We tell stories. You know what I mean? And we're all colleagues in a certain way. So I would just say, to keep in mind the fact that our membership, makes movies here, makes movies all over the world, and that's an important ingredient. It also will, create a sense of welcomeness, within these unions, which are very powerful, and they have a tremendous amount of employees. And it doesn't mean not to use French writers, French directors, or do that. But when something comes from an American production, which is something I think you might like, that is shooting there for the reasons you
No, but
guys
it's
outlined. Would that be a consideration that you would have?
No, we have. I mean, to be honest, it's the difficulty sometimes is combining the two systems. We have a slate of productions that are French or European movies in English, and we do hire WGA or DGA or SAG members, working out the compatibility of the systems of how we finance our movies, the pre-sale system, all of that stuff. While, I mean, it is, you're right. I mean, the more we do it, the more we'll get accustomed to bridging those systems. I must say, we had contrasted experiences of figuring out how to do so, but we're getting better at it because I think also, and that's one of the things, France is looking outwards more. In general, the productions that we're trying to make are, we had the movie industry was mostly led by local comedies for a really long time, and they're not performing as well. So that has led the industry to reconsider itself. But also, I mean, there was this moment for all creatives, which is what justifies the theatrical release, what justifies making a movie for the big screen, and it has, I think, generated a renewed level of ambition that will automatically bring French filmmakers to desire to work and collaborate with American filmmakers. Because the reality is the wealth of talent that you guys have here is unmatched. So a lot of what we're trying to do is, more often than not, I will reach out to American talent to try and, aggregate a talent pool, especially for making a movie in English. But we've
and
also
Spanish also. There are also French movies shot in Spanish, like Emilia Perez, and there's actually a collaboration between screenwriters, American and
Thomas Bidguin. I was going to go there. Thomas Bidguin, for instance, participated in the Sundance Lab, and I can't tell you about the project, but I'm working with Eric Gendronson, which is a WGA member.
Thank you for that scoop.
Yeah,
I
no,
love that. I'm
I'm
recording.
not going to tell you which project, but
You're on the record.
But there's a, I mean. Yeah, building bridges is at the heart of what we're trying to do. So we'll come from the creative. What I guess we wanted to convey is that you have a whole toolbox available now.
Thank you so much. Very quickly, I just wanted to say, because The Substance and Emilia Perez shot in France again. Can you just tell us, like in 2 words, how you made Paris look like Mexico? Because this is really insane. Can you just tell us very quickly? Is it true that it's shot in France entirely, Emilia Perez?
Not our movies, but yeah, it's shot entirely in France. I mean, I will just speak to it because I've researched it and it's pretty amazing. They only did the plates, a little bit of Mexico, but they shot everything in studio in Paris.
I thought you were going to ask me about The Substance because it's been shot. I mean,
The
it's supposed to be in LA.
also,
And,
it's set in LA, but it's shot entirely in France. Unfortunately, we have
100%.
to wrap up. But you should all go talk to him now to ask him about all the details of the.
And the producer of The Substance is here in the back, so he can tell you as
that's
well
amazing. I
about
wanna talk to you
the
too.
amazing story with Demi Moore coming to Paris and saying,
Oh my
"Yeah,
God,
good
I wanna do
vibes,"
something on
and
that.
that's how it started.